when you cut calories, regardless of the method, 25% of the weight you lose is muscle. And the FDA approved a class of drugs that ruins the health of Americans. It's really awful these drugs got approved, and I hear my colleagues saying things like, they're magical, they're wonderful, it's a breakthrough. No, they're not. They're a temporary crutch that has very dire long-term consequences.
William Davis, MD, is a cardiologist and #1 New York Times best-selling author. Dr. Davis is a graduate of the St. Louis University School of Medicine with training in internal medicine and cardiovascular disease and advanced training in interventional procedures at the Case Western Reserve University Hospitals. So we've got several studies indicating how conventional calorie restriction actually doesn't seem to be effective for long-term weight loss. All right. And this is against our kind of conventional wisdom as well. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on there?
Sure, Shawn. It's a great time to be talking about that because a lot of this has come to a head with the GLP agonist drugs. Those are the drugs like Wegovy and Ozempic and Mounjaro. So the evidence is actually quite clear. If you cut calories, we could call it move more, eat less. We could call it push the plate away. We could call it some app that identifies your stress triggers, but it's all cutting calories. Or it could be a drug like the GLP-1 agonists. They all cut calories because they make you indifferent or nauseated when you're thinking about food. It could even be a bariatric procedure like gastric bypass or lap band that constrict and reduce stomach volume. So Shawn, all variations on the same theme, reduce calories. But the science is quite clear. A lot of the science, by the way, from our own National Institutes of Health, the NIH, that when you cut calories, regardless of the method, 25%, more or less, of the weight you lose is muscle. And muscle is the primary determinant of your basal metabolic rate. That is the rate at which your body burns calories to conduct the work of living, breathing, digestion, motion, sleep, all those things. So your body's basal metabolic rate, there's a great study, by the way, called the Biggest Loser study, based on the TV show. So this NIH group enrolled the graduates of the 8th season of that TV show. So these people are proud. They look great. They lost 70 pounds, 130 pounds, right? They leave the show. They stay. Sean, they stay on a low-calorie lifestyle and at least a moderate exercise program and all regain the weight. And so this NIH group studied their metabolic rate and found that it had dropped 27%. Now, the study only went for 6 years because their funding ran out, but it persisted for all those 6 years. So it probably is longer than 6 years. But what that means is you lose muscle when you cut calories by this extreme effort, right? Several hours per day of exercise and reduce calories. They lose muscle, their basal metabolic rate drops, and it virtually guarantees weight regain. So the whole notion of cutting calories, even though most doctors say move more, eat less, cut your calories, all that stuff, they're all deeply flawed ways to not just maintain your weight, but also maintain body shape and youthfulness.
Now, of course, we've got the dieting protocol, exercise, all those different things. But now you just mentioned we've got these new innovations with drugs for supporting weight loss, anti-diabetic drugs. That's kind of the initial framing. But they're doing basically the same thing, as you just said, getting our bodies in a place where we're eating less. And I'm curious, is there any data on what if we stop taking those drugs, for example, that help us to reduce our calorie intake? What happens?
Sean, you hit the very, very important findings that have come out of this experience. So for instance, let's say it's your wife, heaven forbid, and she wants to lose 40 pounds. So she pays $12,000 for a year's worth of Wegovy, say. She loses 40 pounds, of which 10 pounds is muscle. She stops the drug because most people can't afford that forever. She stops the drug. She regains 32 to 34 pounds, virtually all of which is fat. So you don't regain the muscle. So that 10 pounds of lost muscle. And think about that, Sean. 10 pounds of ground beef on your kitchen table. It's a lot of muscle. So she loses 10 pounds of muscle, regains 32 to 34 pounds of fat, very little muscle. She's now more insulin resistant, more prone to prediabetes, higher risk for type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cognitive impairment and dementia, and breast cancer. So the FDA, Sean, the FDA approved a class of drugs that ruins the health of Americans at great cost. So we've made this huge wealth transfer from our pockets into the pharma, all for a temporary solution. So it's really awful. These drugs got approved, and I hear my colleagues saying things like they're magical, they're wonderful, it's a breakthrough. No, they're not. They're a temporary crutch that has very dire long-term consequences. Not just weight regain. When you lose that much muscle, you're also resigning yourself to a life of frailty long-term, loss of independence, difficulty just doing things like walking to the grocery store, climbing stairs, a reduction in insulin sensitivity. So you're more prone to the diseases of aging. And so that's what we're up against now. The tragedy here, Shawn, is that there are better ways to do this. There are far better ways to manage your body composition and not just focus on loss of weight.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing this. We're going to dig deeper into what those better ways are, of course. But I really want to cover this in a more broad way. All right. So just to isolate some of these points and kind of expand our view on this, essentially, we're looking at a situation with, if say, Wegovy, where we have to be on it for the rest of our lives, or we're going to see all of those things take place that you just shared, right? So we're going to see weight regain. We've got data on this now. And in particular, regardless of whether we're on it or not, we're going to be losing muscle. And muscle is really one of these things we've seen is highly, highly correlated with longevity. And we're going to subject ourselves to all manner of dysfunction when we're losing our muscle haphazardly in an effort for a lot of times, even though this is framed as something to, help you to prevent chronic diseases, right? To help you to deal with the symptoms of diabetes. But what it's really doing is accelerating the aging process through the loss of muscle in all these different ways. So with that being said, I want to talk a little bit about what happens when we lose our muscle. All right. So you mentioned insulin resistance. You mentioned more frailty. What about, in you being somebody who's an expert in the domain of cardiology, what about our heart health?
So whenever we have an increase in insulin resistance and inflammation, which goes hand in hand, you increase, exactly right, Shawn, you increase your cardiovascular risk, as well as risk for being a type 2 diabetic, for hypertension, for fatty liver, for all the diseases we know are all around us. And so you're right. With the GLP agonist, you're given a choice. Stop the drug, allow yourself to regain all that fat and be less healthy and less rich. You lose a lot of money and at the same time. Or you can continue the drug and be held hostage by the pharmaceutical industry for a lifetime. That is the awful choice you're given once you start that ball rolling on those class of drugs.
Now, where's the fat coming from that we do actually lose? Is it going to be predominantly the fat that we're trying to target, say like visceral belly fat, epicardial, excess fat, things like that?
So with the GLP agonist, it's about a 50-50 spread, subcutaneous to abdominal visceral fat, but you're making an essential point. The real fat to lose is the abdominal visceral fat. So those among your listeners don't know what I'm talking about. It's the fat in the abdomen. It's the fat that encircles the intestines, liver, pancreas. That's the primary driver of insulin resistance. And of course, insulin resistance is the process that causes weight gain or prevents weight loss. And so it would be better if we could specifically target abdominal visceral fat while preserving muscle. The subcutaneous fat, the fat in the buttocks, thighs, neck, etc., will follow. But if you have a strategy like cutting calories is preferential for subcutaneous fat, not for abdominal visceral fat. The bariatric procedures preferentially lose subcutaneous fat. So the GLP agonists are a slight improvement on that equation, but still far from perfect. There's another NIH study. So the NIH has done a good job of charting out what's wrong, though they don't often interpret it as that. They did another study recently. They took a bunch of people with BMIs of 50, so really big people, put them on an extreme low-calorie diet and extreme exercise program, 2 hours per day, 6 days a week, strength training and aerobic. They have great success. 123 pounds lost over about a year. Of that, 23 pounds is muscle. Now, it was 18% of weight loss, not the usual 25%. So it was an illustration that if you incorporate strength training into your weight loss program, you can blunt, but you can't eliminate the loss of muscle. even with an extreme effort at strength training. So it's great to strength train, but it does not free you from all the problems of losing muscle. As you point out, losing muscle is an age accelerating phenomenon. It takes you closer to hormonal degradation, to loss of bone mass, loss of muscle mass, of course, and all the factors, inflammaging, for instance, the inflammation of aging. So losing muscle is a very bad thing to have happen.
Yeah. Another recent discovery, which again, a lot of this stuff was just happening and we just didn't know the science behind it, but building and maintaining our muscle also supports our cognitive health, right? So we know about these compounds called myokines, for example, and, BDNF and all these different things. It's just one of those things. We don't want to just be physically fit. We also want to keep our faculties as we age. We don't want to just be a really sexy 80-year-old that, can't remember stuff, right? So we want the whole package. And that whole package comes with strength training as well as a big part of that, maintaining our muscle. But that's not the only thing. As you just mentioned, it makes an improvement if we're strength training. But as you shared, there are far better ways to go about this. And it's so crazy that we haven't gotten the memo yet. But unfortunately, again, there's a lot of people, you mentioned the pharmaceutical industry, and sometimes there's well-meaning products for some of these situations, but it's become the dominant thing. And it's creating a situation to where we're profiting from our ignorance. These companies are profiting from our sickness. Now, obviously, we have a huge obesity epidemic in the United States. And the last figures, again, CDC, NIH, was upwards of like 75% of our citizens are now clinically overweight or obese. And this is based on BMI, by the way, which is not the best metric, but we know what we can just look out and see the change that's happened and also what's happening with our kids as well. And so before we get into some of the solutions, better approaches, I want to talk a little bit about that because this has been framed as well, these new pharmaceuticals to treat weight loss as a standard of care potentially for children. All right. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's awful. I think it's unforgivable that we have federal agencies and the Pediatric Society advocating bariatric procedures and GLP-1 agonists for children. Now, there are times where you can't control a child with, say, Prader-Willi syndrome, where they can't control their appetite. But most kids, if they're given the right information and the parents are educated, it's really not that tough. It wasn't that long ago, Shawn, right? 50 years ago, when all kids were thin. There's no such thing as type 2 diabetic kid. There's no such thing as an obese teenager. There was none, or virtually none. And so just to return to some of the old ways we did things and push away the profiteering, predatory practices of the pharmaceutical industry, of the ultra-processed food industry, it's just a return to some of the old habits. Now, one of the things, if you want to get into some of the things I've stumbled onto, is I was playing with microbes. And I just happened to choose one microbe that I think is probably the most important microbe of all, and that's Lactobacillus reuteri. I latched onto that microbe because there is some evidence to show that it has some age-reversing properties. So I got the same microbe used in these studies, the MIT studies, and started cultivating as yogurt. It's not yogurt, it looks and smells like yogurt. But I had thousands of people doing this because when you do it, all the observations made in animals, smoother skin, increased dermal collagen, dramatic restoration of youthful muscle. An old mouse regains all the youthful musculature of a young mouse. In other words, the myocytes, the muscle cells, completely plumped up and became indistinguishable from a young mouse. Testosterone skyrocketed. The immune system was boosted dramatically. Mating behavior, which is a measure of social behavior, improved. So I got this same microbe, started doing it with all of us, and Shawn, all the same things happened. One of the things I saw personally is I gained 13 pounds of muscle in 3 weeks. Unlike you, I don't like going to the gym. So I go 15 minutes once a week. And I gained 13 pounds of muscle in 3 weeks, and my strength went up by 50%. And I've seen this now play out. So I did a clinical trial. And it was the crazy thing about the human clinical trial I did was that because the ladies who do my programs say, oh, okay, the muscle, that's great. Improved immune response, that's wonderful. But we just care about better skin. So, okay, fine. So we do a human clinical trial in ladies. And I asked them, don't change your diet. Don't change your exercise program. Just get this microbe, Lactobacillus reuteri. Now, I happen to add a few things for amplification of the skin effects. Collagen peptides, hyaluronic acid, and the carotenoid astaxanthin, all taken orally. And we did indeed, over 3 months, show dramatic improvement in their skin. They lost their crow's feet. They lost their smile lines between the eyes. Some lost their forehead wrinkles. They're real happy, increased skin moisture, smoother skin. But we measured their waist circumference just because it's free and easy, right? And the average loss was just short of 3 inches. No change in diet, nothing. Some of the ladies, as much as 8.5 inches off their waist.
What was the time span again?
90 days, 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Now, even more interesting, they didn't lose weight. Now, how can a woman lose up to 8.5 inches off her waist, but not lose weight? Well, consistent with the animal evidence, consistent with our large anecdotal evidence, increased muscle. And we're seeing that play out now. So what I think I stumbled on, Shawn, by accident, by sheer dumb luck, is a way to specifically target abdominal fat while preserving or increasing lean muscle mass. Now, we've got more work to do. I want to do a DEXA-type study and quantify the increase in muscle, but I'm seeing it play out every day in real life. People are losing their abdominal circumference, their waist circumference, while increasing muscle and having all the wonderful effects that come from that restoration or maintenance of muscle.
This is amazing. All right. So first of all, we got animal studies showing basically these mice are going from Mickey Mouse to Mighty Mouse. And then in these human clinical trials, activating more of kind of our, I would say superhuman potential, but it's really our natural state. And you mentioned some of these nutritive factors, like things like astaxanthin, for example. Let's talk a little bit about some of those components. Like, why did you choose those things?
Shawn, so I feel great confidence. If we're not treating things, we're restoring things you should have had all along. So that microbe, Lactobacillus reuteri, you should have gotten from your mom when you passed through the birth canal and breastfed. But mom may have lost it because she got exposed to antibiotics. Or maybe you took amoxicillin 20 years ago for an upper respiratory infection. You lost Lactobacillus reuteri. Almost nobody has it anymore. Even though hunter-gatherer humans, unexposed to antibiotics and other things, all have it. All mammals have that, suggesting Lactobacillus reuteri is crucial for mammalian health, and we've lost it. Now, how about the message, cut your fat, cut your cholesterol, cut your saturated fat? That awful advice led to modern people abandoning organ meats rich in collagen and hyaluronic acid. Shawn, I cringe when I hear ladies buying boneless, skinless chicken breast. They threw away the hyaluronic acid, for instance. Lots of ladies are familiar with hyaluronic acid because they apply it topically, like around their eyes. But the real power is ingesting it orally, as you should have by eating skin and brain and other organs. There you have body-wide restoration of skin smoothness, yes, but you also have restoration of joint cartilage. You also have restoration of arterial health because the lining of arteries, the glycocalyx, is all hyaluronic acid. And so we're restoring factors absent. Astaxanthin is one of the carotenoids in addition to beta-carotene, cryptoxanthin, zeaxanthin, lutein. So astaxanthin, yet another carotenoid, it's the most powerful among them for antioxidative effects. I did not appreciate how powerful an antioxidant astaxanthin was. So there's the process, as you know, of inflammaging, the accompaniment of inflammation with aging. And astaxanthin is probably one of the most powerful things you can use to suppress or reduce the inflammation of aging. There's also good evidence that each one of those factors, especially collagen and astaxanthin, has independent effects by themselves on reducing waist circumference. So we put them together. I think what we've got is a synergistic combination. The other thing about this also is that reuteri microbe, the way it works, there's several ways it works, but one of the ways it works is it sends a signal from the vagus nerve up to your brain to release the hormone oxytocin. Lots of your listeners know oxytocin as the hormone of love and empathy. So there's an intensification of affection for the people close to you. There's an increase in generosity. There's an increase in the acceptance of other people's opinions. So at a time, of course, of record social isolation, divorce, suicide, and the rise of narcissistic behavior. That's true, by the way. The psychological community has been formally tracking measures of narcissistic behavior since 1963. And since 1963, the increase in narcissistic behavior, formally measured, has been a 45-degree upward climb. Such that in 1963, if I asked somebody, True or false? I'm a very important person in this world. 13% of people in 1963 said, yes, that's true. Our time, it's more like 87%. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. It's not just the loss of oxytocin, right? But what I see, Shawn, is people replacing this microbe, yes, smaller waist, more muscular, return of youthful musculature, 50% rise in testosterone. And they like people better. I don't think it's a stretch to say this makes people better human beings. You're more generous. You're more concerned with your other people's welfare, and you accept their opinions even when you differ with them.
Ah, wow. As you mentioned, there's a huge lack of that going on right now. And I love that analysis looking at the past of I'm a very important person in this world. And I would couple that with today being able to say I'm a very important person in this world, but I'm not more important than anyone else, right? Having the audacity to say that, it requires us to be healthy, right? And to be able to perspective take and to be more patient and all these things. And actually in a book that I mentioned your work as well, in my last national bestseller, Eat Smarter, I shared a study that was published in the journal Aggressive Behavior. As you know, there's journals for everything. And also some researchers at Oxford University, they wanted to see what would happen when they improved the nutrition of prison inmates, right? And so this is a population of people that are, of course, determined to be more likely to express aggressive behavior, breaking rules and boundaries and things like that. It's not a blanket thing, of course, but that's just how they're perceived. And so what they did was they split them up into two groups, and these were young men, and they improved the nutrition of one group. And this was just through general supplementation, vitamins, minerals, omega-3 fatty acids, as you know, are super important. And the other group received a placebo. And over the course of a couple of months, they tracked different biometrics, but mainly tracking their behavior. And what they found was about a 35% reduction in aggressive offenses, right? So fighting and aggressive outbursts and things like that in the group that had improved nutrition, and upwards of like 50% in overall behavioral offenses. And so the researchers were shocked because no therapy, no group therapy, no particular drug interventions were that effective that they had ever seen. And another group of researchers saw this work and they didn't believe it. So they replicated the study and saw similar outcomes. And it should make sense because our brains and our nervous system, it's all run on the fuel that we're providing it. What if you're deficient in these things? Our brains literally can't work at their highest potential, even quote normally, if we're deficient. And so understanding how important it is to improve our nutrition, just so that we can better associate with each other, connect, problem solve at a higher level, that's obviously important. But, we've been looking at this even with this weight loss conversation, unfortunately, culturally through the lens of more vanity metrics and not looking at all these other health ramifications and just a better life overall. And so this is what I'm really excited about in talking with you anytime, because you're looking at not just here's what we can do to help you lose weight, but we're seeing improvements in your skin health, in your cognitive function, in your feeling of love and connection, right? You can't get all that with Ozempic. And that's just, it is what it is.
Have you heard of this phenomenon called Ozempic face?
Yeah.
That was coined in the New York Times. That is, as you know, so you take these drugs and you lose subcutaneous fat as well as abdominal visceral fat, but you do lose a lot of subcutaneous fat. And you lose the muscle, including in your face. And so a lot of people have said, yeah, I lost 40 pounds or whatever, and I look 10 to 20 years older. So we're starting to see the exact opposite. If you're losing your wrinkles and you get more sebum, that is moisture in your skin, and you're not losing as much subcutaneous fat and you're actually restoring muscle, including in the face, I think we're seeing the exact opposite. We're seeing people look 10 or 20 years younger in addition to all the body. What I'm trying to encourage people to do, Shawn, is don't think I'm going to lose weight. Think I'm going to lose abdominal visceral fat, preferentially target that fat depot, and then also work to preserve or increase muscle. But those efforts have to go beyond simple strength training. And by the way, ladies get upset with me. They say, well, you're going to send me to the gym 2 hours a day for 4 days. No. No one's saying that. If you go to the gym, it helps a little bit, do some strength training. But this all happens even without benefit of strength training. It just comes back. One thing I noticed is the people who were more muscular when they were younger, let's say you're a shot putter or a weightlifter at age 18, you're going to get a lot more return of muscle. So I believe everybody gets a return of muscle, or most people do. But if you were more muscular when you were younger, you're going to get an even bigger one. That's why I was a weightlifter when I was a kid. And I gained 13 pounds. In my 60s, Shawn, 13 pounds of muscle going to the gym 15 minutes once a week.
Amazing, amazing. You do look like you can choke the shit out of somebody. You know what I mean? That's what I first noticed about you. This is really remarkable because we're having a conversation about, yes, having access to these newly invented weight loss supportive drugs. In some instances, it's going to be helpful, but it's being positioned as the thing. And of course, seeing the results, it's very seductive, very attractive, especially when people have, quote, tried so many different things. And what people aren't being educated about, however, is that none of this comes without a cost. There is no free lunch, as it said. And you just mentioned this phenomenon of Ozempic face and talking about what it really is, this loss of muscle as well. But there's some other concerning things. And again, we've got some really sound data on this and things like intestinal paralysis, for example. Like, can you talk a little bit more about something like that? How is that happening?
I can't speak to the mechanism, but I can tell you how catastrophic it can be. If you've ever seen somebody who had intestinal obstruction, it's a surgical emergency because you can have rupture and you have sepsis, where bacteria, fecal microbes enter the bloodstream. You can get sick really fast. I mean, real sick, like ventilator sick, shock, sick, and die. So it bothers me, Shawn, as it bothers you, to think that somebody could pay a lot of money, have it endorsed by their doctor, and put themselves at risk for very serious, even life-threatening. I see this with estrogens. Ladies are often told, for instance, they need estrogen in some form, topical, oral, or intravaginal, for vaginal moisture or other symptoms of menopause. So let's think about that. So a woman is told, take this estrogen, maybe intravaginal or oral or topical, and in order to be relieved some of the phenomena of menopause, but you're going to risk endometrial cancer and blood clots, thromboembolic disease. Is that the choice a woman really has to make? And by the way, so one of the things I get excited about is oxytocin is as good as estrogen in restoring reproductive health. So think about that. So mom delivers a child. She needs that boost in oxytocin. That's why they give ladies an oxytocin drip at time of delivery to provoke uterine contraction.
Is that Pitocin?
That's Pitocin.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. So, but a woman should naturally have oxytocin to do that. And then the same oxytocin causes expression of breast milk for breastfeeding. And that same oxytocin cultivates a mother-child bond after delivery to prevent postpartum depression. So huge effects in reproductive health. And guys, 50% rise in testosterone. Ladies, as a woman gets older, particularly in her late 60s, there's a lot of problems with vaginal atrophy, dryness, irritation, and repeated urinary tract infections. Well, this is a partial solution to that. And if you get the oxytocin via Rotarite, endogenous oxytocin, you're not going to risk endometrial cancer. There's no thromboembolic blood clots. But you might be happier and thinner.
That's a great side effect, And really, even when we're talking about these side effects, they're not side effects. These are direct effects. They're direct effects of doing certain things. And, this GLP-1 agonist target, GLP-1 is one of, and funny enough, years ago, I wrote Eat Smarter maybe 5 years ago. I started the process of writing that book and talking about all these satiety-related hormones long before they were in vogue. I talked about GLP-1 and mentioning that it slows the emptying of your gut. All right, slows the emptying of your stomach. It slows the process down so you feel fuller longer. And that's part of the problem, is that it's targeting this thing in a vacuum as if it's not going to affect everything else. And for some people, they experience extremes of that. And now this is not going to happen across the board. Some people have seen great success with this. But what we're bringing to light here today is that if you stop, you're going to have to be on this forever. If you're not addressing the root cause and a sustainable solution for weight loss, you're going to see the same thing happen as a general calorie restriction, regain of weight, plus some, and a reduction in your metabolic rate overall. Now, we've already mentioned a couple of these key nutrients for supporting this process. You mentioned astaxanthin, hyaluronic acid, And in particular, this really important strain of bacteria. And for more information on that and just more education from you in general, people, of course, can follow you online and going to your website, drdavisinfinitehealth.com. So that's drdavisinfinitehealth.com for more information on that and much more. And I want to talk a little bit more about some of these natural food sources where we can find some of these things. You mentioned organ meats, which for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, humans have been utilizing those things. But recently, of course, it's been kind of dwindled out of our diet. And in particular, now there are a lot of diet frameworks that advocate against those things. And I want to talk about, in addition to organ meats, what are some of these other weight loss supportive foods that have some of these key nutrients? You mentioned astaxanthin, of course. I know that that is something that helps with the omega-3s in salmon, right? To stay more bioavailable and protected. So are there some other foods that you've targeted? You mentioned yogurt earlier. What about that?
So the yogurt, Shawn, is just a way to increase bacterial counts. One of the problems in the whole world of probiotics is that it's very costly to purchase those microbes from a manufacturer. I mean, thousands of dollars often per kilogram. And so when they sell you a commercial probiotic, it's typically very small counts of microbes. So making this yogurt, you don't have to do this, but it's one of the options people have, is a way to increase bacterial counts. So I use an extended fermentation method. We ferment for 36 hours. So as you know, microbes don't have sex. There's no male and female microbes. They have asexual reproduction. One microbe becomes two becomes four. Well, Rotari doubles every 3 hours or so at human body temperature. So we're going to allow it to double 12 times over 36 hours. And we did something called flow cytometry on the yogurt, and we get about 300 billion counts per half cup serving. And so it's just a way to jack up those numbers for bigger effects. So that's one microbe. By the way, there are other microbes that you and I can restore for other kinds of effects. You can restore, for instance, Bacillus coagulans. This is a super gut conversation. You can restore, for instance, Bacillus coagulans, and that causes faster recovery from exercise or strenuous work. I have a tennis pro daughter, and I see her going through some of the really tough matches. Well, she recovers faster because she's getting Bacillus coagulans. Or how about Lactobacillus gasseri, which is also a major colonizer of the small intestine, and it fights back fecal microbes. It's a big problem in modern people, Shawn. Modern people have allowed fecal microbes to proliferate and then remarkably ascend into the small intestine, so-called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And gasseri is magnificently effective for colonizing the small intestine and producing bacteriocins, natural antibiotics, effective in killing fecal microbes. So we can go down the line of all the wonderful, how about Lactobacillus casei? Very interesting microbe that dramatically amplifies your immune system, such that whenever everybody else around you is sick from a viral illness, you're not. You're much less likely to acquire that viral illness, but if you do, you're likely to cut the duration of that illness in half. So it's an illustration, Shawn, of the power of restoring all the microbes we've lost, the hundreds of species we've lost. We even know about some of them, because if they're gone, how are we supposed to know?
Yeah.
But a lot of that science has come out of the comparison of modern microbiomes to that of people living outdoors, hunting and gathering. They have completely different microbiomes compared to us, though curiously, those people living in the jungles of Brazil, the Yanomami, or the Malawi in Eastern Africa, or the people of Kenya, the Maasai, or the people of Tanzania, or the people in the highlands of New Guinea, their microbiomes look almost identical to each other, suggesting that's what we're supposed to look like. But of course, we've drifted so far away, so restoration of lost microbes, big thing. And as you point out, the awful advice to cut fat, cut cholesterol, cause people to abandon consumption of organ meats and thereby collagen and hyaluronic acid, two of the most powerful body composition nutrients you can get. So people who don't get those things because they're squeamish about eating sausage with the casing or eating some liver, they're causing acceleration of skin aging, acceleration of joint aging, loss of cartilage, acceleration of brain aging, acceleration of heart aging. So it's a return to the way things should have been. With the carotenoids, I think what's happening there is there's been a dramatic reduction in carotenoid intake because you and I don't go gather wild plants. No one does anymore. Very few people do. We get produce grown in a hydroponic garden, for instance, that has very little carotenoid content. Or you get your food in a drive-through window in a clamshell or something like that. Highly ultra-processed foods. Ultra-processed foods tend to be very low in carotenoid content. This is true for many other nutrients also, magnesium, some others. But these are the four, the rhodori, collagen peptides, hyaluronic acid, and astaxanthin that are very critical for body composition and the shape of your body. By the way, hyaluronic acid, really so interesting. Ladies know about it, right? Topical, but take it orally and it's a fiber. It's one of the few fibers obtained from animals, not from plants. Almost all fibers come from plants. Hyaluronic acid is a fiber that comes from animals, most rich in brain tissue and skin, as well as some others like tongue. You restore hyaluronic acid orally, it gets to the skin and increases dermal moisture in the dermal layer of skin. It increases joint lubrication because the synovial fluid of your joint is largely hyaluronic acid, and it feeds the microbes in your GI tract. These are very important microbes like Akkermansia and Faecalibacterium. They take that hyaluronic acid and convert it to a fatty acid called butyrate that has all the, as you know, wonderful effects all throughout the body. Reduction in insulin resistance, reduction of abdominal fat, reduction of blood pressure, reduction of blood sugar, deeper sleep, better dreams, and better skin. Because the butyrate, butyric acid, acidifies the skin. Healthy skin is mildly acidic, and it discourages proliferation of pathogenic species like Staphylococcus aureus. And so you acidify the skin, those pathogens like Staphylococcus aureus are diminished, and you're less likely to have redness, dryness, rosacea, psoriasis, seborrhea, and eczema.
Wow, that's so powerful. And also photosensitivity as well.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Astaxanthin, especially in combination with vitamin D. It doesn't make you impervious to sunburns or sun damage, but it makes it much more difficult. Exactly right, Shawn.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. Now, to get back to the broader aspect of this conversation and the conversation about microbes. All right. So just overall, why in the world are microbes so influential over our health?
Good question, but it's an odds collaboration. That's been true for billions of years. It's true for all living creatures. So not just for humans, not just for possums and raccoons and deer, also for insects and butterflies. They all have a microbiome. So it's really a wonderful illustration of the symbiotic relationship that humans have with microbes. And yet, you know, if you're a wild animal, if you're a wild wildebeest or a gazelle living in the wild, you have a normal microbiome. It's us that have decimated this thing called the microbiome. And the thing is, it's showing up in so many ways that many people are not suspecting as due to a disruption of the microbiome. It could be psoriasis. It could be depression. It could be violent behavior and anger, as you pointed out in your prison study. It could be joint pain. It could be low testosterone. It could be loss of libido. It could be accelerated loss of muscle. It could be, in other words, I don't think there's any area of health, any disease outside of infection and injury that we should reconsider all those conditions in light of the contribution of the microbiome. One thing important for your listeners to also factor in is, so one of the things that rhodori does, and Gasseri too, two very unique microbes. So most microbes colonize the colon, where they're supposed to be, but rhodori and Gasseri, very unique. They colonize the 24 feet of small intestine, where they produce those bacteriocins, those natural antibiotics effective against fecal microbes. The fecal microbes that, in my estimation, 1 in 2 Americans, 150 million Americans, have the infestation of the small intestine with fecal microbes. Now, people don't recognize it as that because they recognize it as obesity or type 2 diabetes or depression and anxiety or all the other common conditions. So the key here is if your doctor says, John, your blood pressure's high, it's 150 over 100, we're going to put you on a thiazide diuretic and a beta blocker and an ACE inhibitor, right? Well, he just subjected you to increased risk for sudden cardiac death, depression, 30% increase in risk for type 2 diabetes, and other health conditions for a condition that you could have controlled easily with a much more natural method of restoring loss factors. And by the way, there's something called residual risk in that situation. The doctor gives you 3 prescriptions for blood pressure. You now have a normal blood pressure, but you have not eradicated risk for stroke, heart attack, cognitive impairment, et cetera. That's called residual risk. It's a big bugaboo in conventional medicine. They know that we give you all those drugs, sometimes at great risk, and yet you're still at risk for all those conditions because nothing approaches the benefits of doing it naturally. So we're not doing second best here, Shawn. We're doing much better than what they accomplish in conventional healthcare.
Yeah, yeah. And this whole concept of polypharmacy in and of itself, the more we're stacking things in here, the more quote side effects that we're going to potentially see. And, enough is enough. And this is why your work is so important. And you've been leading the charge for many years now. And in particular, helping us to remove some of the underlying causes, right? So again, somebody's coming in and they have whatever the symptom might be, dysregulated blood sugar or hypertension. If we're not looking at the person as a whole and looking at how could their gut be influencing some of these symptoms that they're experiencing, instead, we're targeting that one thing, treating you like you are, like the symptom is operating in a vacuum. It's just silly. And you pointed out some very explicit foods that can be contributing to some of these problems. One of those being conventional wheat. All right. You literally wrote the book on this. All right. And you've seen this and it's ridiculous, just in a good way. This is more like Ridiculousness, the TV show. Shout out to Rob Dyrdek. All right, this is more like, that's amazing how many success stories you have by people pulling out conventional wheat. So why, and if you could, I want to talk about, you've mentioned ultra processed food a couple of times, but I want to talk about 3 foods that we should avoid that can be contributing to excess weight gain. And let's start with conventional wheat.
Oh boy, okay. So conventional wheat, of course, Shawn, is not what we thought was wheat. It's the creation of genetics research from the 1960s and 1970s, where there were noble intentions to try to feed the hungry of the world by increasing yield per acre of, in this case, wheat, corn, and soy. So a lot of research was funded east of Mexico City, and they succeeded. After thousands of genetic experiments, they took conventional 4.5-foot tall or 5-foot tall wheat and turned it into a short 18-inch to 24-inch tall, thick-stalked, large seed head variation. But it is dramatically different. It's dramatically different genetically. It's dramatically different biochemically. So they took something that was always harmful for humans. Even if we go back 10, 12,000 years and ask what happened to the first humans who consumed wild wheat, wild einkorn wheat, the ancestral 14 chromosome form of wheat. What happened to those people who in desperation when they were hungry, they discovered that if they isolated the seed of a wild wheat plant, they could pulverize it, dry it, and make porridge out of it. This is pre-Egyptian Empire when they made beer and bread out of it. So many thousands of years before that. They discovered they could eat this. What they didn't know and became clear in the historical record is when humans turned to wild einkorn wheat, the ancestral form, there was an explosion in arthritis. There was an explosion in deficiencies, because you can see evidence in the bony record. Something called parodic hyperostosis and crimpor orbitalis. These are bone markers of deficiency, especially of iron deficiency. And there was a huge surge in dental decay. So prior to the consumption of grains, dental decay was almost unknown, Shawn. 1 to 3% of all teeth recovered showed evidence for cavity formation, abscess, or tooth loss or misalignment. When humans turned to wild einkorn wheat, and this is because of the amylopectin A carbohydrate, by the way, not the gliadin, not the gluten, but other things besides that, there was 16 to 49% of all teeth recovered showed decay, abscess, misalignment. Now think about that. 1 to 3% prior to consumption of grains, there was no toothpaste. There's no fluoridated toothpaste, no toothbrushes. There's no dental floss. There's no orthodontists, no periodontists. There's maybe a twig to pull out that piece of wild boar from between your teeth. That's all you had. Yet there was almost no tooth decay. It was the adoption of grains that led to, and of course, all throughout history, humans have found ways to try to prevent that from happening. It was not uncommon for instance, in the Middle Ages, 19th century, to have a mouthful of no teeth or few teeth into your teens and 20s. That was the rule. Now we, of course, compensate by these extremes of dental hygiene to try to maintain. But even then, for instance, 25% of adults in Canada are toothless, completely toothless. So it still happens because we've been told, cut your fat, eat more healthy whole grains. And we didn't tell you that we changed the grains dramatically to amplify the adverse effect, not intentionally, inadvertently.
With this being said, and again, you wrote the book on this, Wheat Belly, New York Times bestseller, mega hit book, changed the game. There have been many different projects and books to come since that are just kind of echoing your work, but you raised the alarm. Are you saying to just avoid all bread at all costs? Or is it a certain type of bread?
You know, Shawn, the example I've used over the years is if I said, Shawn, low tar cigarettes, because they have less tar, and put a filter on it, less likely to cause lung cancer and heart disease, may be true. So if that's true compared to full tar, unfiltered cigarettes, should we conclude that we should smoke low tar filtered cigarette? Of course not, right? Same thing here. There's just no way to completely inactivate all the adverse effects of this thing called wheat that never should have been part of the human diet in the first place. So there's that gliadin protein. We know with confidence, Shawn, that it's the initiating factor in many autoimmune diseases, certainly rheumatoid arthritis and type 1 diabetes in children. The initiating factor is the gliadin protein of wheat. We know that the gliadin protein of wheat yields opioids upon partial digestion, because humans don't have the enzymes to break it down fully into single amino acids.
Gluteomorphines?
Like gluteomorphine, exactly right, yeah. Go to your brain, they don't make you high, they stimulate appetite. So food industry loves this. It increases your appetite, it increases your food consumption, increases your food buying behavior. And in the most extreme cases like bulimia and binge eating disorder, these are the people who sit in front of their refrigerator at 3 a.m. and then go to the toilet and purge. Those people, they'll tell you, I went wheat and grain free for the first time in 30 years. I no longer obsess about food. I'm in control of my appetite. It's really a fabulous effect. So there's those effects. There's wheat germ agglutinin, which is a very potent bowel toxin. If I isolate a milligram, just a speck, and give it to a rat, its entire GI tract is denuded, eroded, and raw. And yet modern people get about 18 to 19 milligrams per day of wheat germ agglutinin. It's a very potent bowel toxin. There's phytates. Those are the things that bind minerals. So if you eat a sandwich or a bagel, it binds almost all the iron, zinc, manganese, magnesium, and calcium. You poop it out in the toilet. That's why I used to see tons of ladies with iron deficiency anemia. And these poor ladies would get bone marrow biopsies and blood transfusions and injectable iron and iron tablets. And they're living with hemoglobins of like 7 or 8, which is much lower than normal 12 or so. They're breathless, they're cold, they're tired all the time, they can't function. Go wheat-free, 2 weeks, gone. I've seen it over and over and over again. Magnesium deficiency. There's almost no magnesium left in modern produce because of modern farming methods. And of course, water filtration removes all the magnesium. Water filtration is very good at removing all magnesium. So we are massively magnesium depleted. To make it worse, phytates bind what little magnesium you have in your gut and you poop it out. So over and over again, Shawn, there's so many mistakes being made by this idea of cut your fat. That's wrong. Eat more healthy whole grains. Even worse. And so I say all this because people say, I don't have a gluten problem. I don't have celiac disease. I can eat wheat and have no problem. Yeah, you do have problems. You might not be aware of it, that it's activating certain changes in your immune system, that you didn't know the amylopectin A, that's the carbohydrate of wheat that raises blood sugar ounce for ounce higher than table sugar, is provoking formation of small LDL particles, the real cause of heart disease, not LDL cholesterol, that thing trumped up by the pharmaceutical industry for billions of dollars of profit. But the tragedy, by the way, Shawn, of the whole statin drug, reduce your cholesterol, all that stuff, is that it took everybody's attention off the real causes of heart disease. Those are identifiable and easily manageable with natural methods, but no one has a pot of gold to get out of that. So they all focus on this LDL cholesterol, statin drugs. The reality is you can have magnificent control. You can even regress, in many instances, coronary disease, risk for heart disease, by doing other things, including elimination of the amylopectin A of wheat and grains.
One of those little known side effects, well, for the average person who's prescribed a statin, is muscle pain and weakness, right? And if we're talking about longevity, and we'll put the study up for everybody to see. A recent huge analysis was done looking at, does taking statin actually extend lifespan? And we're talking about a matter of days here. Like you might get like upwards of like 100 more days or 100 less days. So this study looking at, does this potentially protect people from dying prematurely? It just doesn't hold up. Plus, we see significantly higher incidence of developing insulin resistance and diabetes when you take a statin. Again, it's not without a cost, and it's not addressing the root cause. And with this being said, when we took out the fat, took out the cholesterol, we added in a lot more sugar. So would that be the second of these three? I want to cover three. So we've got wheat. What about sugar?
Big problem. Yes, absolutely, Shawn. No question. So sucrose and other forms of sugar likewise cause the development of small LDL particles. That small LDL particle is very confusing to people. But all it means is that you consume foods that are sugars, such as the amylopectin A of wheat, or sucrose, or high fructose corn syrup, and your liver is very good at converting that to fats. That's called de novo lipogenesis, your liver's conversion of sugars, carbs, to triglycerides. Well, those triglycerides are released into the bloodstream, and they modify your LDL particles. And not LDL cholesterol, but LDL particles themselves. Right. And those LDL particles become small, and small particles the liver doesn't recognize. And they go around and around in circulation for 5 to 7 days, as compared to a large LDL normal particle lasts about 24 hours. So that consumption of that bagel or that sugary ice cream, whatever, cause formation of small LDL that persists 5 to 7 days. So that one indulgence per week gives you 52 weeks per year of increased cardiovascular risk. That's how dangerous this exposure to everything in moderation, cut your fat, eat more healthy, all that stuff causes heart disease. That's another thing, that a lot of the conventional advice, all that stuff we hear, cut your calories, move more, eat less, eat more healthy whole grains, cut your fat, increases risk for heart disease. So,
all right. So we've just covered two of these major culprits in our epidemics of weight gain, right? We've got wheat. We've got this crazy amount of sugar that the average person is consuming now. What's one more?
Well, it's a class, Shawn, but food additives. This includes preservatives. So preservatives keep mold from growing in your food, for instance, but they're also antimicrobial in your GI tract. Or how about emulsifying agents like polysorbate 80 or carboxymethylcellulose or carrageenan in your ice cream? Ice cream, by the way, filled with emulsifying agents because they don't want you to have it thaw, put it back in the freezer, and it gets all hard and separated, right? So that to prevent that, they add all these emulsifying agents. But those emulsifying agents disperse your intestinal mucus. Just like putting a drop of dishwashing liquid into a sink full of oily dishes disperses that oil right away. Same thing happens in your GI tract. And by the way, also with the prep they use for your colonoscopy, the polyethylene glycol, also very powerful way to disperse your intestinal mucus barrier. When you lose your mucus barrier, even for a few minutes or a few hours, bacterial breakdown products enter your bloodstream. And they play all kinds of nasty games with your metabolism, weight gain, insulin resistance, etc. And so the emulsifying agents, big problem. Synthetic sweeteners, the synthetic non-caloric sweeteners, especially aspartame, saccharin, and sucralose. Those also, they take, even if you were a nice, slender, fit person with a normal microbiome, gastrointestinal microbiome, it gives you, those synthetic sweeteners give you the microbiome of an obese type 2 diabetic. And they push you towards being more obese, more diabetic. Just those sweeteners. Yet we have millions of people consuming these diet drinks, other foods sweetened with those awful sweeteners. And there's, of course, many others, but we swim in a sea of these food additives. And among the effects is disruption of the gastrointestinal microbiome. So in a lot of ways, it's just a return to real food. Yeah. The things that great grandma had. And by the way, great grandma loved sheep brain, and she loved heart, and she loved serving you tongue and sausage encasing and stomach, tripe. So a lot of modern people don't want to do that. And that's why I talk about collagen, hyaluronic acid, and astaxanthin. Because if Mary Jane from Wichita says, there's no way I'm serving brain to my family or serving tongue or stomach, well, then second best, we can take it as supplements.
Amazing, amazing. And, there's this growing category of, quote, obesogens, right? So a lot of those fit more and more things that, we normalize are going into that category. These supersede this calorie in, calorie out paradigm. It changes our metabolism in a way that makes us store fat. And so these obesogens, a lot of these chemical additives are in that camp. And, you said it, I'm just thinking back to my grandmother and my mom and some of the things they would cook and eat. And, things like tripe. And I just, of course, thought it was super weird. I was trying to eat my fish sticks. And, my grandmother, my grandma Olame, making chitlins and all these different things, just like, are you kidding me? There's no way I'm eating that stuff. And what we've gone from, and it's not to, again, glorify these foods, but versus what we have today, which is this paradigm of ultra processed foods, where, and this is according to the BMJ, 60%, 62% of the average American adult, our diet is ultra processed food. So these are fake foods. They're so far removed from anything real or natural. And with kids, though, this is where the biggest issue is. And this was published in JAMA, 20-year analysis. By 2018, the average child in the United States diet was about 68% ultra processed foods. I was one of those kids, but I was on the higher, as you know, that's the average. So it's going to be some kids lower in the spectrum. I was at the higher end, probably upwards of like 90% of my diet. And we're choosing what we're making our bodies out of. We're choosing what we're feeding our microbes, as you've really helped us to understand today and how important that is, and just returning to real food. But a big part of that is educating ourselves, really digging into that why, because we're swimming in a sea of Funyuns and Pop-Tarts and, the list goes on. And so it's really refreshing to see somebody who is as educated and remarkable as you and such a great teacher. I just love listening to your voice. And, I actually, prior to this episode, just sat and was listening to one of your lectures that you posted. And it's just really refreshing to learn from somebody. You could just tell how genuine you are. And I appreciate you doing the work for all of us. And of course, we have our St. Louis connection as well. But I appreciate you doing the work for all of us. You got some wonderful books. Wheat Belly, Undoctored is a must read. Undoctored is an absolute must read. And Supergut is your most recent book. Can you tell people where is the best place to pick up copies of your books, to connect with you, get more information, all that kind of good stuff?
The books are at all bookstores and Amazon, of course. I try to consolidate some of my properties. And by the way, my main Facebook page was hacked and taken down by hackers about a month ago. So I've lost that. But there's still plenty of other Facebook page, Instagrams, etc. But the main kind of hub is my Dr. Davis Infinite, the awkwardly named drdavisinfinitehealth.com blog. And by the way, Shawn, I appreciate deeply what you do, because, you and I are no longer welcome perhaps on CBS or NBC or ABC, because they get paid by the pharmaceutical industry. And so what you're doing and other podcasters is so critically important. And I'm so grateful you've had the popularity and success you had, because people need to hear your message.
Thank you. That means a lot, Bill. I really do appreciate that. Everybody, make sure to pick up copies of Dr. William Davis's books. Check out his website, get more information. I appreciate you so much for coming to hang out with us.
Oh, thank you, Shawn. Thanks for all you do.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
About a quarter of the UK population have this parasite called blastocystis. And it turns out it's associated with good health. And if you've got this parasite, you have less internal fat, you have less obesity,